She was the girl blending into the wallpaper, clutching a tray of lukewarm champagne. The high society elites thought she was an easy target, a punchline for their casual cruelty. "You're just a nobody," the rich girl sneered, waiting for the tears. But the room didn't laugh. The room froze. Because the most feared man in the city had just stepped out of the shadows. He didn't look at the bully. He walked straight toward the nobody. The arches of Dora's feet felt like they were splintering. She shifted her weight from her left foot to her right, leaning slightly against the heavy oak paneling of the ballroom wall. The uniform provided by elite staffing was a rigid, unbreathable polyester nightmare. The collar scratched at her neck, and the white button-down shirt carried the faint, indelible scent of industrial bleach and someone else's stale sweat. Dora didn't care. The shift paid double time because it was a Saturday night, and double time meant she could cover the heating bill for her cramped walk-up in South Boston without skipping groceries for a week. Before her, the Astor Hotel's grand ballroom hummed with the low, rhythmic murmur of old money and new arrogance. Men in bespoke tuxedos that cost more than Dora's annual salary stood in tight circles, swirling amber liquid in crystal tumblers. Women dripped in diamonds that caught the light of the 3 massive chandeliers overhead. It was a sea of velvet silk and predatory smiles. To them, Dora wasn't a person. She was a fixture, a mobile table, an invisible entity holding a silver tray of Prosecco. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was safe. It meant no one asked her questions she didn't want to answer, and no one looked too closely at the dark circles under her eyes or the rough, calloused texture of her hands. "Keep the trays moving." "Hayes," a voice hissed near her ear. It was Kevin, the floor manager. He was a tightly wound man sweating profusely through his cheap suit, terrified that one of the billionaires might find a speck of dust on a napkin. "Moving," Dora muttered. She pushed off the wall. Her knees popped quietly in protest. She navigated the crowded floor with practiced precision. She knew how to glide between the sprawling gestures of drunk hedge fund managers. She knew how to duck beneath the sweeping hand of a socialite recounting a vacation in St. Bart's. She was a ghost haunting a party she wasn't invited to. Then she heard the laugh. It was a sharp, piercing sound, high-pitched and manufactured. Dora's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. She hadn't heard that laugh in 6 years, but her nervous system recognized it instantly. She risked a glance over the rim of her silver tray. Standing near the ice sculpture of a swan was Jessica Trent. Jessica hadn't changed, only upgraded. The blonde hair was sleeker now, blown out to perfection. The high school cheerleader uniform had been replaced by a floor-length crimson gown that clung to her frame. She was hanging onto the arm of an older man with silver hair and a Rolex that practically screamed his net worth. In high school, Jessica had made Dora's life a living hell. Dora had been the quiet scholarship kid, the girl who wore second-hand shoes and read paperbacks in the cafeteria. Jessica had been the apex predator. She hadn't just bullied Dora, she had orchestrated her isolation. "Just keep walking," Dora told herself. Turn left at the pillar, head back to the kitchen. She pivoted perfectly, her eyes locked on the swinging double doors that led to the safety of the chaotic, screaming kitchen. She was 10 feet away. 5 feet. Well, if it isn't the charity case. The words cut through the ambient noise of the room. Dora stopped. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, took a shallow breath of air conditioning and expensive perfume, and turned around. Jessica had stepped away from her silver-haired date. She was holding a martini glass, her acrylic nails tapping rhythmically against the stem. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Jessica," Dora said. Her voice was flat, empty. She didn't have the energy for high school drama. She had been awake since 4 a.m. "I thought that was you," Jessica said, looking Dora up and down. Her gaze lingered on the scuffed black orthopedic shoes Dora was forced to wear. Though I almost didn't recognize you without the grease stains. What is this, your third job? A few heads turned. The people nearby, bored with their conversations about stock portfolios and real estate, sensed blood in the water. They gravitated toward the friction. I'm working Jessica. Excuse me, Dora said, adjusting her grip on the tray. She tried to step around her. Jessica shifted, blocking her path. Don't be rude, Dora. We're catching up. Jessica took a sip of her martini, leaving a faint red stain on the rim. I was just telling Arthur here about you. About how you used to dig through the lost and found bins for winter coats. The silver-haired man, Arthur, chuckled politely. He didn't care, but he was indulging his younger, attractive companion. Dora felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she shoved it down. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Getting fired meant eviction. If you need a fresh drink, the bar is in the back, Dora said evenly. I don't want a fresh drink, Jessica purred. I want to see if you're actually good at anything. Jessica's hand twitched. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, calculated flick of the wrist. The martini glass tipped. The clear liquid mixed with 2 gin-soaked olives splashed directly onto the front of Dora's white uniform shirt. The glass slipped from Jessica's fingers, hitting the polished marble floor. It didn't shatter into 1,000,000 dramatic pieces. It just broke into 3 heavy, jagged chunks with a blunt crack that echoed over the string quartet playing in the corner. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Conversations within a 20-foot radius died. Dora looked down. The gin soaked through the thin polyester icy cold against her skin. It smelled like juniper and rubbing alcohol. One of the olives had rolled to a stop against the toe of her scuffed black shoe. Oh my, Jessica said, loudly pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. I am so clumsy. Look at the mess you let me make. Dora's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She stared at the broken glass on the floor. She could feel the eyes on her. Dozens of them. Wealthy, bored spectators watching a peasant get put in her place. No one stepped forward. No one offered a napkin. Clean it up, Jessica said. The playful tone was gone. Her voice dropped, revealing the ugly, jagged edge underneath. Dora didn't move. Her fingers gripped the edges of her serving tray until her knuckles turned white. I said clean it up, Jessica repeated, stepping closer. That's what you do, isn't it? You clean up our messes. You did it in high school and you're doing it now. Nothing changes. I'll get maintenance, Dora said, her voice tight but steady. She refused to shake. No. Jessica pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the floor. You're going to get down there and pick up the glass before someone important steps on it. Kevin, the floor manager, suddenly materialized from the crowd. He took one look at the situation, at Jessica's expensive dress, Arthur's Rolex, and Dora's stained uniform, and instantly made his calculation. Is there a problem here, Ms. Trent? Kevin asked, his voice dripping with sycophantic panic. Your waitress is entirely incompetent, Jessica said smoothly. She bumped into me, ruined my drink, and now she's refusing to clean the glass off the floor. Kevin turned to Dora. His face was flushed red with anger. Hayes, on your knees. Now, pick it up. Dora stared at him. She dropped it on purpose, Kevin. I don't care if she threw it at your head, Kevin hissed under his breath, leaning in close. You pick it up right now or you're fired. And I'll make sure the agency blacklists you in this city. Dora swallowed hard. The threat wasn't empty. The agency was her lifeline. Without it, the rent check bounced. If the rent check bounced, she was back living in her rusted Honda Civic. She looked at Jessica. Jessica was smiling, a thin, victorious smirk. It's just pride, Dora told herself. Pride doesn't buy groceries. Pride doesn't keep the lights on. Slowly, agonizingly, Dora lowered herself. Her knees hit the hard marble. The chill of the floor seeped through her black slacks. She set her tray aside and reached out with a trembling hand toward the sharpest piece of the broken stem. "That's right," Jessica sneered loud enough for the entire circle of onlookers to hear. "Right where you belong. You're just a nobody. You always were." Dora's fingers closed around the glass. The edge dug into her skin, but the physical sting was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the humiliation. She kept her head down, staring at the floor, waiting for the tears to come. But they didn't. She was too tired to cry. She just felt hollow. She reached for the second piece of glass. Then the ambient noise of the room shifted. It didn't just quiet down, it suffocated. The low hum of conversation vanished completely. Even the string quartet, sensing the sudden change in atmospheric pressure, trailed off into a dissonant halt. Dora didn't look up. She was focused on the last piece of glass. Heavy measured footsteps approached. They were distinct. Not the frantic tapping of hard-soled dress shoes, but the solid, deliberate thud of custom leather boots. The kind of footsteps that didn't hurry because they knew the world would wait. The footsteps stopped right in front of Dora. She saw the hem of dark, immaculately tailored trousers. "Leave it." The voice was a low, gravelly baritone. It didn't boom across the room. It didn't need to. It carried a quiet authority that vibrated in the floorboards. Dora froze. She recognized that voice. It had been 8 months. A rainy Tuesday at 3 a.m., inside the fluorescent hell of the 24-hour diner she worked at. A man had stumbled into the back alley, bleeding from a deep laceration in his side. Dora had dragged him into the dry storage room, locked the door, and spent an hour stitching him up with a needle and fishing line from her emergency kit. He had stayed quiet the whole time, his eyes burning into hers. When he left, he dropped a stack of $100 bills on the flour sacks and told her his name, Victor. Dora slowly lifted her head. Victor Romano looked exactly as she remembered, though lacking the blood and the grimace of pain. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, radiating a kind of coiled violence that made the opulent surroundings seem fragile by comparison. He wore a midnight blue suit that looked like it had been sculpted to his frame, a black shirt underneath, and no tie. His dark hair was brushed back, but a few loose strands fell over his forehead. His eyes, a startling pale grey, were locked entirely on Dora. He ignored Jessica. He ignored Kevin. He ignored the circle of millionaires who were suddenly holding their breath. In this city, everyone knew who Victor Romano was. They knew about the shipping conglomerates, the real estate monopolies, and the darker, bloodier rumors that kept the police chiefs looking the other way. He was the apex predator in a room full of house cats. Victor slowly crouched down, mirroring Dora's position on the floor. The fabric of his suit pulled taut over his shoulders. Up close, Dora could smell his cologne, cedarwood, and rain. "Put the glass down, Dora," he said softly. Dora stared at him, her brain short-circuiting. "I have to clean it up, or I get fired." Victor's jaw tightened. He reached out his large, scarred hand, gently wrapping around her wrist. His touch was warm an anchor in the freezing humiliation of the moment. He didn't pry her fingers open. He just held her hand steady until she voluntarily let the shard of glass drop. It clattered against the marble. "You don't work here anymore," Victor said. He stood up, keeping his grip on her hand, and pulled her up with him. He did it effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing at all. Dora stood beside him, her gin-soaked uniform clinging to her skin, her hair a messy knot at the base of her neck. She felt entirely out of place, yet perfectly grounded by the solid wall of his presence, next to her. Jessica, recovering from her initial shock, forced a tight, confused laugh. "Victor, what are you doing? Do you know this waitress?" Victor didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Dora's hand. He noticed the small, thin line of red where the glass had pricked her index finger. He lifted her hand. Slowly, deliberately, he bowed his head and pressed his lips against her bruised, calloused knuckles. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Arthur Jessica's date took a visible step backward. Victor lingered for a moment, the warmth of his mouth a stark contrast to the cold room. When he raised his head, his grey eyes finally drifted away from Dora and settled on Jessica. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Victor's expression didn't change. He didn't yell. He simply looked at Jessica the way one might look at a smear of dirt on a windshield. "You made her kneel," Victor said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. Jessica's face drained of color. The smug arrogance melted away, replaced by raw, naked panic. She looked around, desperate for someone to back her up. But the crowd had physically recoiled. Even Arthur was suddenly intensely interested in the ceiling architecture, creating distance between himself and Jessica. She was clumsy," Jessica stammered, her voice shaking. "She spilled my drink. I saw what you did," Victor interrupted. His tone was dangerously smooth. "I watched you drop the glass." Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat worked convulsively. Victor turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd until he found the sweating, trembling form of Kevin, the floor manager. "You," Victor said. Kevin flinched as if he'd been struck. Yes, Mr. Romano." "Who employs you?" "The, elite staffing agency, sir. And the Astor Hotel." "Not anymore," Victor said flatly. "Clear out your desk. If you are seen managing anything more significant than a fast food fryer in this city by tomorrow morning, I will consider it a personal insult." Kevin nodded frantically, his face completely pale, and practically scrambled backward into the crowd to disappear. Victor turned his attention back to Jessica. She was trembling now, the crimson dress suddenly looking like a target. "Ms. Trent," Victor said, testing the name on his tongue as if it tasted foul. "I suggest you leave, before I decide to make an example of you." "But my coat," Jessica whispered, tears of actual terror welling in her eyes. "Leave," Victor commanded. Jessica didn't hesitate. She turned and practically ran toward the exit, the sharp click of her heels echoing erratically across the marble. She didn't look back. Arthur didn't follow her. Victor didn't watch her go. He looked back at Dora. The icy, terrifying mask he wore for the world vanished, replaced by something much softer, something fiercely protective. "Come with me," he said. Dora looked at the crowd. The elites who had looked at her with disgust 5 minutes ago were now staring at her with profound, unadulterated fear. Because she wasn't just a nobody anymore. She was the woman whose hand Victor Romano had kissed. "I need my coat," Dora mumbled, her brain still struggling to process the shift in reality. "It's in the back." "I'll buy you a new coat," Victor said. "I'll buy you the factory that makes them." He didn't wait for her to argue. He laced his fingers through hers and began to walk. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path to the grand double doors. Men stepped back, women lowered their eyes. It was a silent, absolute display of power. Dora walked beside him, leaving the silver tray, the spilled gin, and the shattered glass behind her on the floor. The November air hit Dora like a physical blow the second they crossed the threshold of the Astor Hotel. Boston, in late autumn, didn't care about bespoke suits or broken glass. It bit through the thin polyester of her gin-soaked uniform, sending a violent shiver down her spine. Victor didn't slow down. He led her down the sprawling granite steps to the curb where a matte black town car idled. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The sheer size of it, coupled with the dense armored thickness of the windows, commanded a wide berth from the valet staff. A driver in a dark suit stepped out instantly, pulling the rear door open. He didn't look at Dora. His eyes scanned the street professional and devoid of curiosity. Victor guided her into the back seat. Dora slid across the leather. It was warm, soft, and smelled of rich mahogany. A second later, Victor slid in beside her, and the heavy door closed with a solid, airtight thud, instantly muting the chaotic sounds of the city traffic. They were encased in absolute, suffocating quiet. Dora stared at the partition, separating them from the driver. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to force the adrenaline out of her system. It wasn't working. The cold gin seeping into her skin felt like a miserable anchor to reality. "Turn the heat up," Victor commanded. The driver didn't speak, but a rush of hot air immediately flooded the cabin. Dora looked at the man sitting inches away from her. The dim amber streetlights passing by outside cast harsh shadows across his face. He was staring out the window, his jaw set in a rigid line. The violent energy that had paralyzed the ballroom was still rolling off him in waves. "You shouldn't have done that," Dora said. Her voice sounded raspy foreign in her own ears. It broke the silence in the car like a dropped plate. Victor turned his head slowly. The grey eyes pinned her. "Done what? Any of it?" she said, her cynicism fighting its way through the shock. She wrapped her arms around herself. "You just fired my manager. You humiliated a woman who comes from a family that practically owns half the zoning board. You made a scene." "I corrected a problem," Victor replied. "You cost me my job. You don't need that job. You don't get to decide that." Dora's voice rose, the sheer exhaustion of her life finally cracking her composure. "You don't know my life. You don't know my rent or my electric bill or the fact that my car needs a new transmission. That double-time shift was going to cover my heating oil for the month. Pride doesn't keep me warm, Victor. Money does. And you just burned my only source of it." She expected him to get angry. She expected the terrifying Mafia boss to shut her down. Instead, Victor just watched her. He took in the defiant set of her chin, the dark bags under her eyes, the stain on her shirt, and the trembling in her shoulders. He reached out and unbuttoned his suit jacket. He shrugged it off, leaving him in just the black dress shirt, and draped the heavy, warm wool over Dora's shoulders. The residual heat from his body enveloped her. It smelled like cedarwood and expensive dry cleaning. Dora tried to shrug it off out of pure stubbornness, but he caught the lapels, holding them firmly together beneath her chin. "I went back to the diner," Victor said quietly. Dora stopped fighting the jacket. She blinked. "What? 2 weeks after you stitched me up?" He continued, his hands still holding the wool tight against her chest. "I went back. I was going to pay off your mortgage, buy you a house, whatever you needed. But the manager said you quit." "I was fired," Dora corrected bitterly. "I stole a box of bandages and some antibiotics from the back office to keep your wound from getting infected." They noticed. A muscle in Victor's jaw ticked. A flash of something dark and lethal crossed his eyes. "Tell me the name of the manager." "It doesn't matter. The place closed down 3 months ago, anyway." "It closed down because I bought the building and leveled it," Victor said flatly. Dora stared at him. The sheer casual scale of his destruction was hard to process. "You tore down a building because I got fired. I tore it down because it was a roach-infested health hazard, and they treated you like garbage," Victor corrected. He leaned back in his seat, leaving the jacket around her. I've had men looking for you for 8 months. You don't leave a paper trail. No credit cards. No lease in your name. I rent a room under the table. Cash only. It's cheaper. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself. Why were you looking for me? I told you we were even. You gave me $3,000 in the storage closet. $3,000? Victor repeated the words, laced with heavy sarcasm. For saving my life. You think my life is worth 3 months' rent in a slum. I think you were bleeding on the flour sacks, and I wanted you out of my kitchen before the cops showed up, Dora said honestly. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because calling an ambulance meant answering questions I didn't want to answer. Victor's mouth twitched into the ghost of a smile. It was a terrifying expression on a man like him. You're a pragmatist, I respect that. But you have a flawed understanding of how my world works, Dora. In my world, a debt of blood is absolute. I owe you my life. So you crash a high society gala to kiss my hand. I was at the gala because I had a meeting with the hotel owner. I saw you from the mezzanine. His voice dropped, losing any trace of humor. I saw that woman drop the glass. I saw the manager tell you to kneel. If I hadn't stepped in, I would have broken his neck right there on the marble. Dora looked down at her hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. I appreciate the rescue. I do. But I'm going to wake up tomorrow with no job and no way to pay rent. You live in a different reality, Victor. When you break things, you can afford to replace them. I can't. The car slowed to a smooth halt. Dora looked out the window. They weren't in South Boston. They were in the Seaport district, parked in an underground garage that looked cleaner than most hospital operating rooms. Where are we? She asked her guard, instantly snapping back up. My home, Victor said, opening his door. You're shivering. Your shirt smells like a cheap distillery, and your hand is bleeding. You're going to come upstairs, get warm, and let me look at that cut. And then we are going to fix your reality. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. It wasn't the gaudy, gold-plated palace Dora might have expected from a crime boss. It was a massive open space, constructed of dark hardwood, exposed brick, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Boston skyline. It was minimalist cold and impeccably clean. Take off the shirt, Victor said, walking toward a sleek, black kitchen island. Dora froze near the entryway, her horns tightly gripping the lapels of his suit jacket. Excuse me. Victor paused, looking back at her. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. For a second, the terrifying mob boss looked almost entirely human. You reek of gin, Dora. You're going to catch pneumonia. There's a guest bathroom down the hall to the left. Towels are in the cabinet. I'll leave something dry by the door. He turned away, opening a refrigerator that seamlessly blended into the cabinetry. Dora hesitated, then walked down the hallway. The bathroom was larger than her entire apartment. She peeled off the wet, foul-smelling polyester shirt and dropped it straight into the trash can. She stood in front of the heated mirror in just her worn grey undershirt and Victor's heavy suit jacket studying her reflection. She looked like a war refugee who had wandered into a magazine shoot. There was a soft knock at the door. Clothes are on the handle. Victor's voice came through the heavy oak. Dora opened the door a crack. A black cashmere sweater and a pair of dark grey sweatpants hung there. She pulled them inside. The sweater was huge on her, the hem falling halfway down her thighs and the sleeves completely covering her hands. The cashmere was impossibly soft against her skin, a stark, painful contrast to the scratchy uniform she had worn for the last 10 hours. She rolled up the sleeves and walked back out to the living area. Victor was sitting on a low leather sofa. A polished wooden box rested on the glass coffee table in front of him. He had rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt, revealing a sprawling canvas of dark, intricate tattoos creeping up his forearms. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the space beside him on the couch. Dora walked over slowly. She sat down, keeping a careful foot of distance between them. Victor opened the wooden box. It was a high-end first aid kit. "Give me your hand." "It's just a scratch," Dora said, tucking her hand into the oversized sleeve of the sweater. "I deal with worse chopping onions." "Hand. Now." The command was soft, but it left no room for negotiation. Dora reluctantly extended her right arm. Victor took her hand. His grip was entirely different from the rough, careless way men usually handled her. It was firm, but incredibly gentle. He examined the small, jagged cut on her index finger, where the broken stem of the martini glass had bitten into her skin. He soaked a cotton pad in rubbing alcohol. "This will sting." "I know how alcohol works," Dora muttered. He pressed it to the cut. Dora didn't flinch. She kept her face blank, staring at the side of Victor's face. He was focused intensely on the small wound. "I remember your hands," Victor said quietly, discarding the bloody cotton pad and opening a small tube of antibiotic ointment. "In the diner, when you were sewing up my side. Your hands were steady. You didn't shake. Most people would have panicked with that much blood." "Panic is a waste of time," Dora said. "It doesn't stop the bleeding." Victor looked up, his grey eyes catching hers. "No, it doesn't." He smoothed a small black adhesive bandage over the cut. He didn't let go of her hand immediately. His thumb brushed over the rough calluses on her palm. "You work too hard for too little," he said. "I work for what I can get. It's honest." "Honest?" Victor scoffed lightly, releasing her hand and leaning back. "Look where honesty got you today. On your knees in front of people who aren't worth the air they breathe. The world doesn't reward honest people, Dora. It grinds them into the dirt. And your world is better." Dora shot back, her cynical edge returning. "You take what you want with threats and violence. You enforce your will because people are terrified of you. That's not a better world, Victor. That's just a different kind of bullying. You just have a better suit than Jessica Trent." The silence that followed was heavy. Anyone else in the city would have been checking for exits after speaking to Victor Romano that way. Victor just stared at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him. The coldness vanished, leaving something remarkably handsome and deeply dangerous in its wake. "You really don't fear me, do you?" he asked softly. "I don't have anything worth stealing, and I'm too tired to be afraid," Dora replied. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping the oversized sweater around her legs. "So what happens now? You've played the white knight. You've paid your debt. Can I go home?" "You're not going back to South Boston. I have rent due on Tuesday. I told you your reality is changing." Victor closed the first aid kit. "Tomorrow, you will have a bank account with $5 million in it. You will have a new apartment in a secure building. If you want a job, I will buy you a restaurant and you can run it. If you want to do nothing, you can do nothing for the rest of your life." Dora stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, a cold, hard knot formed in her stomach. "No." Victor frowned. "No, I don't want your money," Dora said firmly. "I don't want a fake restaurant, and I definitely don't want to be your kept charity case. I know how men like you operate. A gift is never just a gift. It's a leash. I've spent my entire life scraping by to keep my independence. I am not selling it to you for a bank account." Victor's eyes narrowed. "It's not a leash. It's what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Dora snapped, standing up from the couch. The sudden movement made her dizzy, but she planted her feet. "I saved your life. You saved my dignity. The ledger is clean. We are even. I'm leaving." She turned and marched toward the door, her bare feet padding against the hardwood floor. She didn't make it 5 steps. The heavy oak door to the penthouse didn't just open, it flew inward, bouncing hard against the rubber stop on the baseboard. Dora gasped, taking a sharp step backward. A man stood in the doorway. He was built like a freight train, wearing a leather jacket and breathing heavily. Blood was smeared across his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were wrapped in white gauze that was rapidly turning red. Victor was off the couch in a fraction of a second. The relaxed conversational man vanished instantly. In his place stood the apex predator, a gun materializing in his right hand, seemingly out of thin air, leveled directly at the intruder's chest. "Leo!" Victor barked, lowering the weapon slightly but not holstering it. "What the hell is this?" Leo stepped into the apartment, immediately kicking the heavy door shut behind him and throwing the deadbolt. He looked at Dora, his eyes narrowing in calculation, before turning his full attention back to his boss. "The Moretti family," Leo said, his voice a rough, gravelly wheeze. "They hit the warehouse on the docks 10 minutes ago. Burned 2 of the shipment trucks." Victor's face turned to stone. The air in the room grew suffocatingly dense. "Casualties. 3 of our guys are in the hospital. Carmine took a bullet to the shoulder, but he'll live." Leo wiped the blood off his cheek with the back of his hand. "They're moving fast, Vic. But that's not the worst part." Victor's grip on the gun tightened. "Spit it out. Word is already on the street about the Astor Hotel," Leo said grimly. He gestured a bloody finger toward Dora. "Everyone knows you crashed the gala for a waitress. Rumor is she's your weak spot. Lorenzo Moretti put out a bounty. 50 grand to anyone who can grab the girl and bring her to him." Dora's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. 50 grand. In her neighborhood, people had been killed for $50. 50 grand meant every junkie, every low-level enforcer, and every desperate street thug in Boston would be hunting her by sunrise. Victor didn't look at Dora. He kept his eyes locked on Leo. The terrifying calmness had returned to his face, but it was a dead, empty calm. The eye of a hurricane. "Where is Lorenzo right now?" Victor asked quietly. "Hunkered down at his club in the North End. He's got 10 guys on the door. Get the cars ready. Pull everyone from the south side. If Lorenzo wants a war, we bring it to his front door tonight." "Done," Leo said. He turned to leave his hand on the deadbolt. "What about the girl?" "She stays here," Victor said. "Nobody comes up this elevator. If anyone tries, you kill them and leave the body in the lobby as a message." Leo nodded once and slipped out the door, locking it behind him. The silence that rushed back into the penthouse was entirely different from the quiet in the car. This silence was loaded. It hummed with violence and impending death. Victor finally turned to look at Dora. She was standing frozen in the middle of the room, the oversized cashmere sweater suddenly offering 0 warmth. Her cynical armor, the tough exterior she had spent years building, was entirely useless against this. This wasn't a rich girl pouring a drink on her shirt. This was a death sentence. "Are they going to kill me?" Dora whispered. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook, but she couldn't stop it. Victor walked toward her. He holstered the gun at the small of his back and stopped inches away from her. "No one is going to touch you," Victor said. His voice was an iron vow. "Because of you," Dora suddenly shouted, pushing her hands against his chest. It was like pushing a brick wall. He didn't budge an inch. "Because you had to play the hero. You couldn't just let me clean up the damn glass, could you?" You had to make a scene. And now I have a bounty on my head. Tears of sheer frustrated terror pricked her eyes. She pushed him again. I survived on my own. I don't bother anyone. I just wanted to pay my rent. Victor reached out and caught her wrists. He didn't squeeze hard, but his grip was absolute. He pulled her slightly closer, forcing her to look up into his grey eyes. They were dark, stormy, and fiercely possessive. You're right, Victor said softly. I did this. I put the target on your back by touching you in public. I dragged you into my world. Let me go, she choked out, trying to pull her hands away. I need to get my things from my apartment. I have to leave the city. You go back to that apartment, you'll be dead before you unlock the door, Victor said bluntly. You run, they will find you. You don't know how to hide from these people, Dora. But I do. He released her wrists and brought his hands up to frame her face. His calloused thumbs brushed gently across her cheekbones. The intimacy of the gesture, paired with the lethal reality of the situation, made Dora's head spin. You said earlier that you don't want to be my kept charity case, Victor murmured, stepping into her space so completely that all she could smell was his cedarwood scent and the metallic tang of gunpowder. You said a gift is a leash. Fine. No gifts. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. But you are staying here, because the ledger isn't clean anymore. I owe you my life, and now I owe you your safety. You're going to stay in this penthouse until I wipe the Moretti family off the map. And if they kill you? Dora asked, her voice trembling. Victor smiled. It was a cold, brutal expression. They won't. I have something to come back for now. He dropped his hands from her face, turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back as he threw the deadbolt, stepping out into the hallway and leaving Dora entirely alone in the glass tower, surrounded by a city that was suddenly hunting her. The lock clicked into place with a heavy metallic finality. Dora stood in the center of the vast, open living room for a long time. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, engineered by millions of dollars in soundproofing and thick, bullet-resistant glass. Below her, the city of Boston was a grid of indifferent amber lights. Down there, people were sleeping, arguing working graveyard shifts. Down there, a war was starting over a spilled martini and a wounded ego. Up here, she was entirely alone. She didn't cry. Crying burned energy she couldn't afford to lose. Instead, her survival instincts, honed by years of evading eviction notices and navigating dangerous neighborhoods, kicked in. She began to move. She needed to know her cage. Dora walked the perimeter of the penthouse. She checked the windows. They didn't open. She found the master bedroom, a massive space dominated by a king-sized bed perfectly made with dark charcoal linens. She checked the master bathroom opening cabinets. No weapons, just expensive cologne, straight razors, and sterile white towels. She moved to the kitchen. It was immaculate, a chef's dream that looked like it had never been used. She opened the refrigerator. It was stocked with bottled water, expensive cuts of vacuum-sealed meat and fresh vegetables. She stared at the food. Her stomach gave a hollow, painful cramp. She hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at 5 in the morning. If they come through that door to kill me, Dora thought, I am not dying on an empty stomach. She found a heavy cast-iron skillet in one of the lower cabinets. She set it on the induction stove. She chopped an onion with a pristine santoku knife she found in a block on the counter. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the blade against the cutting board was the only sound in the apartment. It grounded her. It was normal. She cooked a steak. She made a pan sauce with butter and a bottle of red wine she found on the counter. She ate standing over the island, tearing into the meat with a fork, chewing methodically. Midnight passed. Then 1 in the morning. Then 3. She didn't sleep. She sat on the leather sofa, her knees pulled to her chest, the heavy cast-iron skillet resting on the glass coffee table within arm's reach. It was a pathetic weapon against men with guns, but she wasn't going down without swinging. She watched the sky over the Atlantic Ocean slowly turn from pitch black to a bruised, dull purple. The city began to wake up. Morning news shows would be broadcasting soon. People would be commuting, and Dora had no idea if Victor Romano was alive or dead. At 6:14 a.m., the elevator machinery groaned deep within the walls. Dora's spine snapped straight. She grabbed the handle of the cast-iron skillet. The metal was cold against her palm. She stood up, her bare feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor, her breathing shallow and fast. The heavy oak door unlocked. It swung open slowly. Victor stood in the doorway. He didn't look like the untouchable phantom from the ballroom. His midnight blue suit jacket was gone. The black dress shirt was torn at the shoulder and plastered to his chest with sweat and drying blood. His knuckles were raw, split open, and stained dark crimson. A brutal dark bruise was already blooming along the left side of his jaw. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He leaned heavily against the wood, his eyes finding Dora. He looked at her standing in the middle of the room, in his oversized cashmere sweater, gripping a frying pan like a battle axe. A slow, exhausted, genuine laugh rumbled in his chest. It ended in a harsh cough. "I told Leo to shoot anyone who came up here." Victor rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. "I didn't realize I'd have to worry about her taking a skillet to the skull if I survived the night." Dora didn't laugh. She slowly lowered the pan, her hands shaking so badly she had to set it on the counter before she dropped it. "Are they?" She swallowed hard. "Is it over?" Victor pushed himself off the door. He walked with a slight limp, moving toward the kitchen island. "Lorenzo Moretti is dead. His brother is on a plane to Montreal and won't be coming back. The bounty is cancelled." He reached the island, gripping the marble edge to steady himself. He looked at the half-empty bottle of wine from her cooking, grabbed it by the neck, and took a long, steady pull straight from the glass. "You're bleeding," Dora said. Victor looked down at his ruined shirt. "Not all of it is mine." "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered. Her voice was sharp, a reflex. The cynical waitress and the pragmatic survivor taking over. Victor didn't argue. He moved to the leather sofa and practically collapsed onto it, letting his head fall back against the cushions. He closed his eyes. Dora went to the bathroom. She grabbed the wooden first aid box he had used on her finger hours ago, along with a stack of wet towels. She walked back into the living room and stood over him. "Shirt off," she said. Victor opened one eye. "You're very demanding in my house. You're getting blood on the leather. Take it off." He groaned, sitting forward. His fingers fumbled with the buttons. He was losing dexterity, running on fumes and adrenaline that was rapidly crashing. Dora batted his hands away with a sharp tisk. She unbuttoned the ruined shirt herself, her small, nimble fingers working quickly. She peeled the fabric back over his shoulders. He was covered in bruises. The old scar on his side, the one she had stitched up in the diner, was angry and red, but it held. The new damage was a deep, ugly laceration across his left bicep, and a series of bruised ribs that looked dangerously close to fractured. Dora knelt in front of him. She wiped the dried blood from his chest and arm with a warm, damp towel. The water turned pink immediately. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly, not looking at his face, focusing entirely on cleaning the cut on his arm. "I told you. I owed you a debt." "Don't lie to me," Dora snapped, pressing an alcohol-soaked pad directly into the cut. Victor hissed, his muscles violently tensing, but he didn't pull away. Men like you don't start a war over a debt, Dora said, her voice tight. You could have paid me off. You could have given me the money and walked away. You didn't have to tear the city apart. You didn't have to kiss my hand in that ballroom. You chose to. She finally looked up. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and demanding the truth. Victor looked down at her. The mask was entirely gone. There was no arrogance left, no carefully constructed intimidation. Just the raw, bleeding man underneath. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, Victor said. The confession was quiet, heavy, and absolute. Dora froze, the bloody towel hovering over his skin. 8 months. Victor continued, his grey eyes burning into hers. For 8 months I looked for the girl who dragged a bleeding stranger into a supply closet and didn't ask for a damn thing. I sat in boardrooms with billionaires, I dealt with killers and thieves, and all I could see was you, standing under those fluorescent lights, smelling like cheap coffee, and bleach with hands that didn't shake when they held a needle. He reached out. His hand, heavy and bruised, cupped the side of her neck. His thumb rested against her pulse point. It was beating wildly. When I saw you in that ballroom, Victor whispered, when I saw that worthless woman make you kneel, I didn't care about the debt. I didn't care about the Moretti family. I just wanted to burn the entire building to the ground for touching you. Dora's breath hitched. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible. She had survived by blending into the background, by being the nobody that people ignored. And here was the most dangerous man in the city, telling her she was the only thing he saw. Victor, she breathed. I'm not a good man, Dora, he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I am violent. I am ruthless. But I will never let anyone make you feel invisible again. You are mine to protect. Dora looked at the blood on his hands. She looked at the bruises on his ribs. She realized with a terrifying clarity that he meant every word. He had just killed a man to prove it. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. I don't need protecting, Dora said fiercely. I need a partner. Victor's eyes widened slightly. Dora dropped the towel. She reached up, gripping the lapels of the oversized cashmere sweater, and pulled herself forward. She pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a gentle cinematic kiss. It was desperate hard and tasted of copper and exhaustion. Victor groaned, his good arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his bare, bruised chest. He kissed her back with a sudden possessive hunger, anchoring her to him, as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. For the first time in her life, Dora wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was exactly where she chose to be. The transition from a ghost to a queen didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet, brutal spaces in between. 2 days later, the bruising on Victor's jaw had faded to a dull yellow. The city had quieted down. The news reported a tragic gas leak at a North End social club that had claimed the lives of Lorenzo Moretti and several associates. The police asked no questions. The mayor made no statements. The ecosystem of Boston's underworld recalibrated, shifting entirely under Victor's absolute control. Dora was sitting at the kitchen island, a laptop open in front of her. She was wearing a pair of Victor's sweatpants and a fitted black tank top. Beside the laptop sat a steaming mug of black coffee and a thick manila folder. Victor walked into the kitchen. He was dressed in a tailored grey suit, looking sharp, lethal, and completely restored. He walked up behind her, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Leo is downstairs with the car," Victor said, glancing at the screen. "We have a meeting with the Port Authority in 30 minutes. You don't have to come." "Yes, I do," Dora said, not looking up as she typed rapidly. Dora, it's a negotiation for shipping lanes. It's incredibly boring, and the men in that room are deeply unpleasant. Dora finally stopped typing. She closed the laptop with a definitive snap and turned on the stool to face him. "Sit," she said, pointing to the stool next to her. Victor raised an eyebrow, amused by the command, but he sat. Dora slid the manila folder across the marble counter toward him. "I spent the last 48 hours going over the financial structures for your legitimate front companies. The restaurants, the real estate holding firms, the logistics company." Victor looked at the folder, then at her. And your accountants are lazy," Dora stated bluntly. "They are hemorrhaging money through inefficient supply chains in the restaurant group. Your real estate properties in the seaport are under-leveraged, and the logistics company has a 14% discrepancy in overhead costs that looks dangerously close to embezzlement by your regional manager." Victor stared at her. The amusement vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. He opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, highlighted ledgers, and a restructuring plan drafted in neat, aggressive handwriting. "You did this in 2 days?" he asked. "I've been managing inventory and balancing registers since I was 16 years old, Victor. Math is math. Whether it's $1,000 or 10 million, the numbers don't lie. Your people are stealing from your legitimate businesses because they think you only care about the illicit ones." Victor slowly closed the folder. He looked at her, his grey eyes alight with a mixture of shock and profound, undeniable pride. "You told me I could have a bank account and do nothing for the rest of my life," Dora said, leaning forward. "I told you I don't want a leash. I meant it. I am not going to sit in this glass tower and play the grateful saved woman. If I am staying in your world, I am working in it." "You want to run the legitimate fronts," Victor realized. "I want absolute control over them," Dora corrected. "I want the regional manager fired by tomorrow. I want the restaurant supply contracts renegotiated. You handle the men with guns. You handle the docks. I handle the paper. We make it an empire. Together." She held his gaze. She wasn't asking for permission. She was laying down her terms of surrender. Victor didn't say a word. He reached across the space between them, hooked his hand around the back of her neck, and pulled her into a fierce, breathless kiss. It was a seal. An agreement. "Leo is going to be terrified of you," Victor murmured against her lips. "Good," Dora replied, pulling back and grabbing her coffee. "He needs to stop tracking mud on the hardwood floors anyway." 6 months later, the air in the grand ballroom of the Astor Hotel was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the low rhythmic hum of string instruments. It was the annual charity gala for the Boston Arts Endowment. The room was packed with the city's elite, the same politicians, hedge fund managers, and socialites who had occupied the space half a year prior. At the edge of the room near the ice sculpture, Jessica Trent stood in a shimmering gold gown. She was nursing a glass of champagne, laughing too loudly at a joke made by a junior state senator. Suddenly, the ambient noise in the ballroom began to die. It wasn't an immediate silence, but a slow, rolling wave of quiet that started at the grand double doors and swept across the floor like a chilling wind. Jessica frowned, turning toward the entrance. The crowd was parting. They weren't just stepping aside. They were physically recoiling, clearing a wide, unobstructed path through the center of the room. Walking down the center of that path was Victor Romano. He wore a tuxedo that looked darker than night, his presence alone commanding a terrified respect that suffocated the room. But no one was looking at Victor. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Dora didn't look like a waitress in a cheap polyester uniform anymore. She wore a floor-length gown of deep midnight silk that moved like liquid around her legs. The dress had a high neck and long sleeves, but the back was entirely open, displaying the strong, elegant line of her spine. Her dark hair was swept up in a flawless, intricate twist. There were no diamonds dripping from her neck. She didn't need them. The cold, absolute confidence radiating from her was more intimidating than any jewelry. She walked beside the most dangerous man in the city, not as a captive, but as an equal. Victor leaned down slightly, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. Bored yet immensely. Dora whispered back, her face maintaining a perfect neutral mask of polite indifference. But the mayor needs his campaign donation, and we need the zoning permits for the new warehouse. We could just threaten him. Paperwork is cleaner, Victor. Behave. Victor smirked, tightening his grip on her waist. They moved through the crowd. Men who had ignored Dora 6 months ago now bowed their heads as she passed. Women who had sneered at her scuffed shoes now looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. As they neared the center of the room, Dora's eyes caught a flash of gold. Jessica Trent was standing perfectly still, her face completely drained of color. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her knuckles were white around the stem of her champagne flute. Dora paused. Victor stopped immediately beside her, a heavy, silent guard dog waiting for a command. Dora turned her head and looked directly at Jessica. She didn't glare. She didn't smirk. She didn't say a single word. She simply looked at Jessica with a cold, detached pity one might reserve for a bug on the sidewalk. Jessica's hand began to shake. The champagne trembled in the glass. She took a frantic, clumsy step backward, her heel catching on the hem of her gold dress. She stumbled, barely catching herself on the edge of a cocktail table, completely shattering her carefully constructed image of poise. Dora didn't wait to watch her recover. She turned her head away, entirely dismissing Jessica's existence, and continued walking. "You didn't want to make her kneel?" Victor asked quietly as they reached their VIP table. Dora took her seat, smoothing the silk of her dress. She looked out over the ballroom. She wasn't the invisible girl blending into the wallpaper anymore. She was the one holding the pen, writing the ledger for the entire city. "No," Dora said, taking a glass of water from the table. "I don't care enough about her to make her kneel. She's just a nobody." Victor smiled, a slow, terrifying and deeply affectionate curve of his lips. He sat beside her, resting his hand over hers on the white linen tablecloth. "Yes, she is," Victor said. And as the orchestra began to play again, the elites of Boston desperately tried to pretend they weren't terrified, while the woman who used to clean up their glass quietly ruled them all. If you felt the tension, the power and the undeniable chemistry of this story, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to let us know you want more gripping high-stakes drama. Share this video with a friend who loves a fierce, pragmatic heroine who takes absolute control of her destiny. Your support helps us bring more intense, grounded storytelling to life. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of passion, power, and revenge. Join our community today and tell us in the comments what you want to hear next.